Is Paul George being traded to the Knicks? So now that the offseason is here, there are a lot of reports coming out about players who are potential free agents or are already free agents, and one of them is Paul George. Paul George is in an interesting spot, and so are the Clippers, obviously, because Paul George has a player option. So what that means is Paul George can opt into his $48.8 million, and basically he would be on the Clippers for one more year, unless they trade him, which we'll discuss in this video, but he would be technically a Clipper for one more year. But there's a lot of rumors around him maybe opting out, because if he opts out, then he could re-sign with the Clippers for a larger and longer deal. And we have heard reports that, potentially Paul George wants a bigger contract than what was offered. Again, I don't know if that's 100% fact. We always hear these reports, but apparently the Clippers offered him something similar to Kawhi's deal, and he had wanted more. So that's what the potential report said is going on. So with that being said, they have not come to an agreement yet, but now we are at the point where there are reports that Paul George could opt into his player option and then be traded from the Clippers to another team, which is why the intro I said, is Paul George going to the Knicks? Because a report came out today that the Knicks are kind of monitoring the situation. And if Paul George opts in, that's the perfect scenario for the Knicks to trade for him, because it is only a one-year deal. And we heard, again, reports, whether they're 100% true or not, we don't know. But we heard reports earlier in the year that the Knicks were somewhat interested in Paul George, but he wanted this, massive contract, 4-year, whatever it was, and that the Knicks were not interested in, giving that large of a deal. But remember I said Paul George wants a big contract, allegedly. So if the Knicks were not going to guarantee that for him, maybe he wouldn't opt in and request a trade, assuming that's what he would be doing to get to the Knicks. Because then he either goes there or stays with the Clippers, and the Clippers, again, allegedly offered him an extension. So if the Knicks are not even talking about an extension at all, why necessarily request a trade if his goal is to get the longer contract? But from the Knicks standpoint, this could be a really good option, because I talked about it a few weeks ago in the video I did on the Knicks offseason moves, and I was talking about them getting Mikal Bridges, who I thought would be like a perfect fit. And part of that is because I feel like they could definitely use another wing player, someone who is a 3-and-D guy, which Paul George, we know, definitely can do that. And Paul George obviously has been an all-star, so that's another thing. But I was saying that basically getting someone like Mikal Bridges, 3-and-D, wing guy, all that stuff, would be perfect for them, because the area where they're thin is wing depth. Before they even made the trade for OG, they were thin at the wing position because it was Barrett and then Randall. And then the backup was Toppin, but Toppin really wasn't getting any playing time. So, it was really Randall and RJ. So now fast forward to this past season, you still had Randall, even though he got hurt, but it was Randall and OG now. There still really wasn't a true backup wing. And again, if it's Paul George or Mikal Bridges, they may start alongside OG and Randall, assuming they re-sign OG. So that's something they'll work out. But my point is, they didn't have another wing option. And I think Paul George fits exactly what they're trying to do with the Knicks. I just felt like Mikal, because I feel like I mentioned Paul George in the video too, saying he'd be a good option, but I felt like Mikal, because he was younger and fits their timeline more, was why it makes more sense. And obviously his connection with, Jalen Brunson, DiVincenzo, Josh Hart, Villanova. But Paul George as a player himself definitely fits what they're doing. It's just a matter of, obviously, his health, because he has been injured a lot pretty recently, and, the contract extension. But other than that, just his play style, he gives them another scorer, someone who can, like someone who has literally been an all-star, like I said. He doesn't have to be the number one option here either, which might make it less likely that he gets hurt. Because although a lot of these athletes are in great shape, of course, you have to remember that wear and tear, sometimes things are just, unfortunate, just random accidents. But also, if Paul George is the number one option, and so he's getting more wear and tear than some other guys, it can accumulate and lead to an injury happening, if that makes sense. So if he's on the Knicks, Jalen Brunson is the clear number one option, and then you can decide whether it's him or Julius Randle as the number two scoring option. So at best, he's 2. At worst, he's 3. But he won't be asked to do too many things. Like, he's going to be asked to be Paul George and do his thing, but he's not going to be asked to do extra things that may put too much wear and tear on his body, if that makes sense, because they have so much depth, outside of him. Because assuming they bring everybody back, you have OG. So OG is going to take the best defender. So Paul George doesn't have to, he still has to play defense, but he doesn't have to guard the best player on the other team. You'd be surprised how much energy and effort and all that it takes out of you just to play defense. That's why guys who play both sides of the floor are like prize targets in the league, because it's hard to find a guy who plays elite defense and still can score 20 plus 25 a night. Because think about it, that Knicks team, will fight to the finish, and that just wins you a ton of games alone. Even in the playoffs, we saw they had so many injuries, and of course they got knocked out eventually. But think about it, they were making wins happen when nobody would think it's possible for a win to happen. So imagine you have that, IQ, knowledge, effort, energy, and you have all the talent and you're healthy, and you add Paul George to that mix. You can't tell me that team is not a contender to come out of the East. If they got Paul George and they re-signed OG and Hartenstein, and then we'll see what they do from there. But just assume that's the team. Like, they don't add anybody necessarily, but they don't subtract anybody. So they do that, but they add Paul George. So I guess they're adding one person. But that team, healthy, you can't tell me that team is not one of the favorites to come out of the East. Of course, because Boston won the championship, they are going to be the odds-on favorite, because when you win the championship and you obviously bring everybody back, which they basically are because they're all under contract, you're going to have them be the favorite. But outside of Boston, with Paul George, that team is nice. Like, that team could compete with anybody in the East, and they could definitely come out of the East as well. Now, how they make this work salary-wise, I'd have to go look at the Knicks, the money on the books, because I feel like, because Paul George is making $48 million, and the Knicks have a ton of picks, like, the picks won't be a problem. The Clippers will be, I know they want to still win now, but assuming that they're okay with trading Paul George in order to get some assets back, the Knicks can throw them a ton of picks, which the Clippers don't have. So they'll be thrilled with that. But in terms of the money aspect, I don't know who they would have to include in order to get it done. I feel like Mitchell Robinson, who has been discussed potentially in some trades, would have to be in the deal, but I don't know that that's enough, because Mitchell Robinson isn't making $40 million. He's not even making $25 million. Like, I think he's making something in like the $18 million range. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're obviously not including Brunson. That goes without saying. Josh Hart, OG when they re-sign him, Hartenstein when you re-sign him, DiVincenzo. Well, those two can't even be traded anyway because they're signed. Although I guess a sign and trade, but like they're not going to do that. So the only person who's making a bunch of money would be Randle, but I don't know that the Clippers want to trade for Randle for Paul George, if that makes sense. Like, not that Randle's a bad player, but like, that doesn't make sense. Like, are they going to still try to win now then if they're trading for Randle? So like, that doesn't really make sense unless they're just going for the picks. So I don't know how the money works. Maybe you get a third team involved. That's definitely plausible. Like, 3-team deals happen all the time. Someone gets Mitchell Robinson. Maybe it's a 3-team deal with Washington at this point. I don't know. And the Clippers get Jordan Poole, I guess, because he's the only one making big money on the Wizards. That's the only way that would make sense. I'm not saying the Clippers are trading for Jordan Poole. I'm just saying it might be a 3-team deal, but look out for this.